What's up, everyone? This is JointhelightsideTV with your host, Michael. Now, today we're going to be delving into something a little bit different. We're going to be examining the 7 Principles of Hermeticism. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of what Hermeticism is, it is a very old spiritual-based system that is rooted in a form of occultism. Now, a lot of people hear that word occult, and while there is some strange affiliations with that phrasing, I don't think that Hermeticism itself is something that is like problematic in itself, but because it is very abstract and often ambiguous with its phrasing, I think that there is room for interpretation, which can manifest pathologically. So I'm going to be mapping out what the 7 principles are, sort of the direct quotes from the Kabbalion, how it describes it, and then some of the, interpretations that I parsed out from it, especially in its applications in the modern era. Just as a side note, some of the principles of Hermeticism, they actually informed philosophers like Hegel, and which Hegel went on to influence Marx. So some of these you might actually find familiar in some sense, and in others, like, you might actually just recognize the direct sort of description of it. This is an incredibly old faith-based system. It's been around, like, I'm not even entirely sure, but I've heard that it's actually been around since before the Egyptian era. So a very long time. Okay, so I'm just going to map out the 7 principles first. So the number 1 is that is mentalism. Number 2 is the principle of correspondence. Number 3 is the principle of vibration. Number 4 is the principle of polarity. Number 5 is the principle of rhythm. Number 6 is the principle of cause and effect. And number 7 is the principle of gender. All right, so now diving into the first principle, how the Kabbalion describes the principle of mentalism is actually as follows. The all is mind, the universe is mental. Now, for this principle, I think this is actually one of the ones that I take somewhat of an issue with. I think that there is counterexamples that can be put into this segment, whereas I think there can be some problematics like immediately taken up with it. So it assumes that, like, there is no, like, objective reality, that, like, basically, like, the universe, like, exists within the mind. Now, I don't think I really need to delve into much more of the problem with that. Now, another problem that also comes with it is that this sort of thinking evolved into the thinking of, like, that the body is a prison, and that, like, we are sort of like in the prisoner of our body, that our like mind is different, and that this is the sort of thing that actually seems to be informing things like gender ideology. And I'm not going to go into that into this episode, sort of the problems that might stem from that, but I think that there is an immediate concern that sort of the idea behind, like, I think there is within reason that thinking that, like, the mind can shape reality, but I think that if you are have a pathological manifestation and you sort of take this into account, then I don't think it's really going to be doing you any favors or anyone around you in a healthy sense. Okay. Also, an important note is that the idea of hyperreality, sort of the idea that's, like, behind, like, the Matrix, like the movie, was branched off from that, that there is such a thing as like more real than real. And that's when you kind of encounter like these sort of philosophical underpinnings of like, are we just brains in a vat? Like that we're just being charged electrodes to like experience what we're going through and things like that. Which again, that like brings up the question is like, is there such thing as objective reality? And I think that is like a very dangerous line of thinking to indulge, like more than just beyond like a thought experiment. I think that there is like within reason to like sort of engage with that. But like to actually be like implemented like through like policy making and whatnot, I think it should be avoided for obvious reasons. Okay, so now on to number 2, the principle of correspondence. So I think that this one in particular, I remember reading it and I was just like, oh yeah, like certainly do know these principles. I just didn't really consider them like sort of a universal like occult like template that would like express itself throughout the ages. So the quote with this one is, as above so below, as below so above. Now this I believe actually comes out with sort of the idea of I believe it's this one that actually comments on manifestation. Now there is something to manifestation of which I like somewhat do believe in that like if you hold it in mind and you sort of express yourself in the sense that like you are behaving in accordance to your goals and that you're making it happen rather than just being a passive subject and sort of just allowing things to happen to you, then that is a complete other story. But if you're actually like acting out in accordance to what you're wanting to be brought out in your life, that there is certainly something to that. And there is certainly a few problems I think that sort of come out from this principle, such as that like we are not necessarily like our thoughts all the time, that often like the sort of like negative thinking that potentially comes into mind, like we didn't necessarily like ask for these things, and that it just because you think a terrible thing doesn't mean you're a terrible person. If that were the case, then holy moly, a lot of us would be in deep trouble, myself included. Also like that this like our thoughts, like both like in a healthy and negative way, like our thoughts are like entropic. I hope I'm using that word correctly. I believe I am. That it is really based like within like chaos, and I think that's also why we have such like innovation that's like expressed itself within our species. Like we have these great innovative thinkers like Nikola Tesla, and like some of the things that he came up with, like I swear to goodness that he's a bloody alien. Like it's absolutely crazy. Also, I believe that the idea of actualization, that's like sort of where that came out from. That phrasing often comes out in the psychological literature. I believe that was also a principle that was phrased out by Abraham Maslow, sort of the well, actually, it was self-actualization, but like sort of the idea that like there's this like sort of ideal self that we like strive to be, and that we're like trying to make it become a reality. So yeah, now on to principle number 3, the principle of vibration. Now, like, I don't really have any problem with this one on its face. I think that there certainly is something to it. I think that there is things that aren't necessarily like impactful in sort of like how in the range of motion that they're in. I just hear like vibration and that it's like ball that's vibrating. I think that things are often like in motion, and that's sort of like why things eventually fall apart, in terms of structures and things like that, or like energy is produced. So this one I think is like certainly like has like weight to it. It also holds that thoughts have vibration, and I suppose that could be phrased into how it like impacts, like how your thoughts can impact reality. I would actually like to have somebody who's like much more well versed within the Hermetic principles. I've done like some reading on the subject myself, but I actually haven't read the Kabbalion or the Corpus Hermeticum myself. So some of these principles I'm not as versed as I could be. I'm certainly not a scholar on the subject, but if there's anybody out there that's sort of listening to what I'm saying and they take issue with what I say, or like maybe they have something within their own experience that they could share that sort of adds to one of the principles I'm sharing about, please down in the comments, like share your piece. I would love to hear your feedback and what we can do from there. Okay, so now on to principle number 4, the principle of polarity. So in the Kabbalion, this is quote from it. This is what it says. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes must be reconciled. Now, this is probably the principle I actually have the most issue with, and I think it's because it has some obvious manifestations within, Marxist thought. Sort of the idea that came behind accelerate the contradictions, comrades. Sound familiar? This is sort of how it's informed. I think that in a very elementary sense, this can be true. It sort of gave the examples of like how like hot and cold, they're like a conjoined topic of temperature, like things like that, where it's like completely innocuous and like, well, certainly it is complex, like if you really get down to the science of it, but the sort of the outline point behind it is pretty simple in nature. So I don't really take issue with that. There is a lot of abstraction that's sort of applied to this principle, so I think that it can be applied for way too many things, in the sense that like it could also be like there's just like no discernment with it, and that's why I find it like very concerning how this sort of idea is also playing out with like trying to merge what like some people like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, he's trying to like I'm pretty sure I have this correct. He views socialism and capitalism as thesis antithesis. Now he's trying to merge the two to create stakeholder capitalism. Now that very idea is I'll quickly try to explain it. So it operates off of something called an ESG metric, and basically the idea that capitalism has is that it is funded by shareholders, and that the decisions on behalf of the company, they're supposed to be to the benefit of the shareholders. Now for stakeholder capitalism, it basically like treats the heads of these corporations as Soviets, that they're like a form of council, and they make decisions on behalf of the people, that they're experts within their domain, and that basically they view us as we're all too stupid to do the correct form of action, and they make like these sorts of acts towards like like climate change, like the environment, sort of like social issues that go on. So like social, and then they try to play it out that like they supersede like regulation and policy, and they enact their own, like they are the government, and so that's governance. So it plays out in those realms. So when I hear this principle, like especially this principle in particular, I find it deeply problematic. But anyway, so that's the principle of polarity. Now, there is the principle of rhythm now, number 5. So, according to the Kabbalion, it goes, I quote, everything flows out and in. Everything has its slides. Everything has its ties. Sorry. All things rise then fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Now, I actually somewhat do think that this principle is like very reflectant in reality. I think that things like sort of like even within politics, like you have these radical swings of people who are sort of the outliers, that they commit one action and then it's often like there's a response to the sort of action. And I think that really does speak to that principle, especially within the realm that's going on in politics right now, with sort of the new left, how they're taking over academia, or they have been for the past few decades. And now there is, as the new left calls, a reactionary group, which in modern parlance, it's the conservatives that are actually giving pushback, and I am one of them. A lot of the messaging that has been going on with these political agendas, they've been completely egregious, and they are very they're quickly thought, or that's not what I actually want to say. They're quickly thought of, and they're done too quickly without thinking it through enough. So an example of that I would put is that recently, and this is not just in America, it's also in Canada, that there is a mandate with mental health practitioners, even people who actually have like an associate's degree. I think that this is true in the States. I'm not sure if it's true in Canada right now, but like basically mental health practitioners, they're actually compelled by law to undergo gender affirming care. So that would be basically like your client comes in and they express that like, I like want to be like the opposite gender of which I am. It only takes like 3 sessions now to actually be admitted for hormone therapy, and to actually start undergoing transition. Now, I have a whole other podcast that I can dedicate to this topic. There is a large number of reasons of why this is incredibly dangerous, especially with how radical the form of treatment is, and how there is lots of underlying issues that can come from transitioning, like how there's studies that suggest that a lot of these people who have undergone gender transition, they're actually going to be facing sort of the consequence that comes with hormone treatment that causes like cancer. And I think that is not a good choice for anybody. I genuinely care about these sorts of things, especially when if somebody like comes into our care, last thing that we wish upon them is an ill fate. Like, that's why they're coming in. We would like for them to actually have like better lives coming out from these sessions, not pushing them towards the blender. Like, that's the last thing I want. Or any, like, sane, like, mental health practitioner, or that isn't sadistic. So I think that, like, warrants its own episode in itself, but I'm going to leave it at that rate for now. Now for principle number 6, there's the principle of cause and effect. So this is the quote from the Kabbalion. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to a law. Chance is but a name for a law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes a law. So I think that this law is probably the most straightforward. There's really not that much more to say about it, aside from, like, drawing recognition to one's feelings, and how our thoughts and behavior may affect something before us. Now, I think that there is one point of contention, one point to bring up with this particular principle is that it does not necessarily take into account chaos and entropy. We cannot always discern a cause. Like, we can certainly draw the best held theory at the time that has evidence to suggest, but the sort of causal nature behind it is a little flimsy. I think that this is, like, really does draw out the Gnostic quality behind Hermeticism. Okay, so now there's the final principle, the principle of gender. So to quote, gender isn't everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Now, I think that this theory in particular is very much true. I think that it's actually the very principle that deeply informed Carl Jung. He had the idea of the animus and the anima, how we each have a spirit within us that is conceivably masculine and feminine, that there is traits that are often associated with a particular gender that we behave in, given certain situations and whatnot, or the, like, people that we're surrounded by. But it doesn't just isolate itself to just, like, human beings or, like, creatures. It also says to all things, like, including inanimate objects. So it's I guess I do have some issue with that. Like, if it's not a living thing, then I wouldn't conceive it to have a gender. But then at the same time, if you look to, like, other cultures and their languages, how they actually, like, ascribe, like, a masculine or feminine, like, pronoun affliction to certain objects and whatnot, then it's kind of like, well, our language is already somewhat tied in with that, so it'd be, well, it doesn't really seem fortuitous to actually, like, untangle that. So that aside, I guess that's sort of just, like, a personal issue that I take with it, but at the same time I could see some reason for it. I think that this claim in particular, I think, is really interesting in the sense that I would actually like to hear how, like, some modern gender theorists would actually react to this principle, because I'm sure that some of them would be like that, well, gender is a social construct, and that, like, gender like doesn't exist, or for people that are, like, identify as agender or non-binary or something to that effect. So that would be interesting to hear their account on the matter. But yeah, that is sort of what I wanted to articulate primarily in this episode, is the sort of mapping out of these principles, because they seem to be coming up much more in the modern parlance, and I think that they're often informing people without them knowing that sort of like the idea of it is coming up without people actually knowing the name of it. So if you all found that deeply interesting, if there's anything that you would like to comment upon, please comment down in the description below. If you could leave a like, subscribe, that would be awesome. And I'm also going to have a note for my other channels right here. And if you would like to come back, watch some more videos, that'd be awesome. All right. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have an awesome day. Please look out for each other. It's starting to get really dicey out there, and I really hope you all are doing well. Thank you very much. Hope you have a pleasant day. Bye.